They say a good deed never goes unpunished. Well, I was the proof of that because the last time I tried to do the right thing, I was beaten, burned, and stabbed to death by the people I once risked everything to save. And the worst part? I never even got a thank you. Half a year into the worst famine our rural town had ever seen, while children cried themselves to sleep and bones jutted through skin, Claire Bennett, the city girl everyone worshipped just because she had soft hands and fancy words, used her pregnancy as an excuse to trick her fiancé Jacob Carter and his family into hoarding the relief supplies that were meant to save lives. And me? I tried to stop it. I begged them. I argued, I pleaded, and when that didn't work, I stole food behind their backs and secretly delivered it to starving villagers, only for the whole damn truth to spill out when someone saw what I was doing, and in a panic, the Carters shoved all the blame on Claire, saying it was her idea, her hands, her lies, which technically wasn't wrong, but they said it to save their own skin, not because they had a shred of decency. The villagers, those same people whose lives I saved, turned on her in a frenzy, shaming her, beating her, pushing her right to the edge until she jumped into the river with her unborn child clutched to her chest, and Jacob, the man I was supposed to marry, decided all of that was my fault, and so began my personal hell. He hit me every day, burned my skin with iron tongs, stabbed me with needles, laughed while I cried, and his parents didn't just look away, they encouraged it, blaming me for losing a Carter heir and for ruining their future in the city, as if I owed them a perfect ending for stealing my life, my land, my body, my dignity. And when I screamed for help, when I begged the villagers I once fed to stop it, they looked right through me like I was already a ghost, and eventually I became one. But the universe must have a twisted sense of justice, because I woke up again, reborn on the very day Jacob first suggested hiding the food, the day I tried to fight them and got threats in return, and this time, I looked at the table where the entire Carter family sat, expecting me to argue like before, and I said, okay. I kept my voice small, meek, submissive, just the way they liked it, while inside me, the hatred burned hotter than any branding iron Jacob ever touched me with. I remembered it all. The deaths, the betrayals, the baby, the river, the mob, the needles in my arms, the dark red welts on my back, and I knew this time I wasn't going to be the one who died. I wasn't going to save anyone. I wasn't going to fight their sins for them. I was going to let them dig their graves, bury themselves in it, and then I'd walk away with everything they stole from me, and more. When Jacob's mother ordered me to haul supplies and threatened to starve me if I didn't move fast enough, I ran like I was scared, even though my legs were trembling from the hunger, not fear. They didn't notice the blood on my back when the rough crates sliced through my shirt. They didn't see how I bit my tongue to keep from snarling at them. They thought I was still the same weak girl who didn't know how to survive, but this time, I welcomed every wound, because each bruise was evidence. Each scar would be a receipt. They stashed the food in a cave and made me crawl in and out like a rat, thinking that when the time came, I'd be the one they blamed again, and they were right, but that's exactly what I wanted. When Jacob shoved a greasy bowl of meat and white buns into my hands and hissed, "Don't you dare touch it, this is for Claire," like she was a queen and I was filth, I took it with both hands and smiled, because I knew I was carrying the first spark that would burn their entire house down. As I walked through the rocky path with that hot food in my hands, my stomach howling, I thought of my parents, kind people who died early and left me behind with the Carters, who used their land and turned me into Jacob's child bride while acting like they were doing me a favor. The villagers didn't care then either. When my parents died, no one stopped the Carters from taking my home, my future, and now these same people expected me to die for them again. Not a chance. I had walked through hell once, and this time, I was dragging them all with me. Claire Bennett glared at me through the cracked doorway the moment she saw me approaching with a bowl of hot food, her voice sharp and full of venom as she hissed, "Why did you come through the center of the village? Are you trying to let people see that I still have meat to eat?" And I kept my head low, pretending to be timid, pretending like I hadn't memorized the exact paths where eyes would follow me, pretending like it hadn't been my plan all along to make them wonder why the Carter family's favorite educated girl got to dine on fat pork while they gnawed on bark and dirt. And she snatched the bowl from my hands, took one look at the greasy meat, and gagged, her face twisting in disgust before she stumbled backward, vomiting so hard I thought she'd break something, and then she turned those bloodshot eyes on me, hatred glowing behind them like wildfire. "Jacob warned me you'd try to hurt me, and the baby you think giving me fat like this won't make me sick? That's exactly what you want, isn't it?" You want me to miscarry? And before I could respond, her hand was already in my hair, yanking my head up with a strength I didn't expect from a woman who acted so delicate in front of the villagers. And in that moment, her mask slipped completely. No more sweet city girl, here just a monster fueled by paranoia and entitlement, screaming that I wanted to steal her place, take her man, sabotage her baby. And I could have fought back, I could have pushed her, but I didn't, because I needed her rage, needed her to act out, needed someone to see it. I whimpered and choked out a pathetic explanation, blaming Jacob, pretending I didn't know that fat was bad for pregnancy, pretending I didn't notice the slap across my face until the sting bloomed red and hot like fire, and she called me a slut, said I was mocking her for getting pregnant before marriage, accused me of seducing Jacob by existing, and when I broke free and ran, I heard her collapse onto the bed behind me, hands cradling her stomach like she was protecting a treasure. And when Jacob came home later that night, smelling like river mud and secrets, he didn't ask questions, she just dragged me out of my corner of the bed and punched me hard enough that stars exploded in my vision, screaming that I tried to kill Claire, that I was jealous, that I wasn't worthy of the Carter name, and Mrs. Carter kicked me in the ribs while calling me a curse, screaming that Claire was a blessing to the family and I was just an unlucky mouth to feed, and Mr. Carter, cold as ever, muttered that if I was going to keep making trouble, I might as well starve, so they threw me outside, no food, no blanket, no mercy, and I curled up against the stone wall like a piece of garbage, shivering through the night while my fingers traced the scabs on my arms and my eyes watched the moon pass slowly across the sky, and even then, even in that pain, I made sure every passing villager saw the bruises, the swollen face, the blood-crusted forehead, because the next part of my plan needed their pity, or at least their guilt. I bit down bitter greens I dug up with my bare hands, tasted dirt and humiliation with every chew, and when the villagers muttered that I looked like a dying dog, I smiled inside, because their whispers were getting louder. Word was spreading. People were starting to ask questions, like why the relief supplies hadn't arrived yet, like why some people were dying while others weren't. I heard the first real cry break from a man's lips when he reported that another family, 2 more houses down, had starved to death, 50 households gone, just like that. And still no food. Still no word. The villagers began to crack. Where's the grain? Where's the truck? They demanded, circling the Carter's house like vultures, and Mr. Carter lied through his teeth about broken wheels and delays, but his forehead was sweating like a man who knew the noose was coming. I knew, right then it was time. Time to let them see what desperation could really do. Time to let the truth slip, piece by piece. The storm I'd been stirring for weeks was finally about to break. It didn't take long, just a few more days of silence, a few more nights of children crying themselves to sleep, a few more shallow graves dug behind houses, and then it happened, right on schedule, when Jacob Carter snuck out after dark carrying a tray of food for Claire Bennett and a half-dozen starving villagers, too restless to sleep, too desperate to care, followed the smell through the night air and crouched outside Claire's window, praying for even a whiff of something warm. But instead of hope, they heard Jacob's voice through the cracked shutters, smug and stupid, saying there was enough stolen grain stashed away to keep Claire fed for weeks, and right then and there, everything unraveled, because when Claire flung open the door and threw up her untouched pork in disgust, like a princess rejecting a feast while her subjects died in the dirt, the rage that had been boiling just exploded. One man screamed, "You're eating while my kids are in the ground?" And Jacob barely had time to shut the door before fists started flying and neighbors poured into the street with torches, sickles, hoes, whatever they could grab, and within minutes, the entire Carter house was under siege, not by me, but by the people I once saved who now had nothing left to lose. "Mrs. Carter shrieked as they kicked the door down. Mr. Carter puffed up his chest and demanded to speak like civilized folks, but no one was listening. One man shouted, "You watched my mother die and said nothing," and someone else wailed, "You promised us food, and now there's nothing but corpses." And I just stood at the edge of it all, calm, silent, invisible, watching the crowd drag Jacob and Claire into the yard like rag dolls under firelight. Claire looked nothing like the radiant city girl she once pretended to be. Her face was swollen, hair tangled, clothes soaked in sweat, but she still had the nerve to look at me like she wasn't finished, like I was still the enemy. And then came the worst lie of all. Mr. Carter, shaking with fear, shouted that I was the one who stole the grain, that I hoarded it and fed the meat, that I threatened them into silence, and Claire, God help her, picked up that torch of a lie and ran with it, pointing her bruised finger at me and screaming, "It was Emily Brooks. She wanted to kill my baby. She gave me meat to make me sick. She told us to lie." And for a second, the crowd hesitated, their fury shifting toward me like a wave ready to crash, and Jacob leaned close enough to smell the rot in his breath, and whispered, "You're the reason he died last time this time. I'll make sure it's you." And his hand jabbed into the bruises on my arm with that sick, twisted smirk I knew too well, and maybe I should have cried or begged or pleaded, but instead I ripped my arm away, stepped back, and raised my voice above the crowd, shouting, "Fine. You want answers? Go get the production team leader. I'll tell you where the food is, but only if he comes." And that made them stop, blink, turn toward each other, because now they weren't just angry, they were suspicious. What if I was telling the truth? What if I did know where the grain was? Some villagers rushed off to fetch the team leader, while others kept screaming at me, grabbing my hair, slapping my face. One woman even clawed at the inside of my thighs while screaming that her babies died because of me, and I gritted my teeth and let them do it because I needed every bruise, every cut, every gasp of pain to be real, because once the truth came out, they'd know exactly what kind of monsters they were, and they'd never be able to wash the blood off their hands. Just before I passed out, I forced myself to grab a sickle and press it to my own throat, saying, "If you kill me, you'll never find that food," and they backed off just enough to let the moment freeze. I glanced at Claire, who stood trembling beside Jacob, and she mouthed something to me silently. "The team leader is my classmate." But I smiled, slow and cold, and whispered back, "Let's see how much that's worth." Because the real storm? It hadn't even started yet. Claire looked rattled for the first time since this nightmare began, grabbing the edge of Jacob's filthy shirt like she needed something solid to hold onto. But I didn't even flinch when the production team leader finally showed up, flanked by a group of officials in clean uniforms with sharp eyes and shoes that had never touched our dirt roads before, and the moment Claire spotted him, she perked up like a wilted flower catching the sun, smiling like a saint and tipping her chin proudly, probably expecting him to walk over and clear her name with one wave of his hand. But instead, he stopped dead in his tracks when he heard what I said: 60 families left out of 200, children dead, mothers gone, entire bloodlines erased, all because the relief grain never made it into our mouths. And his face changed in an instant, going from confusion to fury as he turned toward the officers behind him and ordered them to listen carefully, because this was bigger than a few missing bags of flour. This was state-level corruption. This was death by greed, and I took a deep breath and pointed straight at Mr. Carter, Jacob, and Claire, my voice steady as I said, "They hoarded the supplies. They used it to feed themselves and their mistress while we buried our neighbors." And just like that, the whole village erupted again, not in chaos, but in confession, because once someone breaks the dam, everyone wants to be the first to scream about the flood, and suddenly villagers were lining up to swear they'd seen Claire with flour on her sleeves, that Jacob had given her meat while their own kids begged for broth, that I was the one they saw starving in the mud with open wounds, not them. But the Carters weren't done trying to crawl out of hell. They started spinning lies like they were silk, saying I was bitter, that I made it all up because I was jealous of Claire's beauty and her unborn child, that I forged the receipts and faked the injuries, that I'd always been trouble, that I didn't even cry when my parents died, and honestly, I almost laughed at how pathetic they sounded, how desperate, how arrogant, even with their hands already tied behind their backs. Mr. Carter's face twisted in righteous fury as he shouted that I should be grateful they raised me at all, that without them, I'd be dead in a ditch, and Claire, pretending to be the noble city girl again, sniffled and said she was just here to help the village and build a better future, that all she ever wanted was to be kind, and Jacob, trying to act heartbroken, said I must have hurt myself for attention, that he never laid a hand on me, that I was in love with him and couldn't handle rejection. And for a second, I saw hesitation in the leader's eyes, saw the weight of the lies pressing against the truth, but I had come prepared. I reached into my blouse and pulled out the original grain receipt with Jacob's name on it, signed and dated the exact day he and his father made everyone else go work on the mountain. And when one of the officers took it and read it aloud, the whole courtyard went dead silent. Not a single sound except for Claire's choked gasp and the soft sound of Jacob's pride crumbling into dust. I wasn't done. I handed over the little notebook I'd hidden beneath a loose floorboard, the one where I wrote down every single time they dragged me to that cave to haul bags of grain, every stolen sack, every fake excuse, every night I bled for their sins. The lead officer looked up, eyes sharp, and said in a voice that cut through the morning fog, "Mr. Carter, Jacob Carter, Claire Bennett, you are under investigation for embezzlement, abuse, and contributing to the death of over 100 villagers." And just like that, the last thread snapped. Jacob lunged at me like a wild dog, screaming that I ruined his life, that Claire was his future, that I was supposed to be nothing, and it took 2 officers to drag him back while he kicked and spat like a cornered rat, and Claire dropped to her knees, begging, crying, reaching for her stomach like the world owed her something just because she carried a child she never loved, and I watched, not with joy, not with pity, but with a cold, perfect sense of closure, because this wasn't just a sight was balance. They destroyed my life in one timeline. In this one, I was going to make sure they never got the chance again. After the Carters were dragged away in chains, faces swollen, clothes torn, and Claire cradling the empty shell of what had been her last excuse to be pitted, I stood alone in the village square surrounded by the very same people who once turned their backs on me while I screamed for help, who watched me bleed, who ate the grain I risked my life to steal, and then pretended they didn't hear me when the Carters locked me out to die in the cold. And now they came to me with fake tears and twisted smiles, calling me Inging like we were family, like we hadn't just survived a war where I was the only one left with scars that told the truth. And suddenly, everyone remembered how much they cared about me. Aunt Linda cried about her sister choking on clay when there was no rice left, saying maybe if I'd given her just a little grain she would have lived. And Uncle Greg wiped at invisible tears as he whined about his son starving to death in his arms, asking if I ever felt guilt while he sobbed over a tiny grave dug with his own bare hands, and I just stared at them like strangers, because that's what they were, leeches in human skin, and I could see it in their eyes that what they really wanted wasn't forgiveness, it was land. The same land the Carters stole from my parents when I was a child, the same land that got Mr. Carter elected village chief, the same land I worked like a mule while they dressed Claire in silk and called her special. What none of them expected was that the inspection leader, Mr. Sullivan, had personally declared all the Carter property would now legally transfer to Meth's adopted daughter, and the only person in that cursed household who didn't have blood on their hands. And suddenly, I owned 20 acres of prime farmland, and the whole village panicked. "Emily, we're still family," they said. "You can't plan it all yourself," they said. "Let us help you manage it," they said, and I smiled so sweetly you'd think I'd forgotten how they once let Jacob carve into my back without a word. I told them the land was already under contract with the production team leader, Mr. Thompson, for temporary management while I left for the provincial capital, and if they had any questions, they were welcome to ask him, but everyone knew Mr. Thompson didn't take bribes and had no time for sob stories, so they sulked away like rats with nowhere left to feed. That night, I walked through the village one last time, breathing in the stench of regret and rotting lies, and when I passed the Carter house, I found Claire lying half-conscious in bed, eyes dull and lips cracked, and still, even in that state, she glared at me like I was the reason she'd lost everything. "You dare show your face?" she spat, and I dragged a chair beside her and sat down calmly. "I'm heading to the capital," I said. "Wanted to know if you still think you'll be returning to the city with your precious Jacob." She lunged at me, screaming that I ruined her life, that she was supposed to be more than this, that she was educated, privileged, and I was just some backward village girl with dirt under her nails, and she threw herself out of bed in blind rage, slamming her ribs against the edge of the frame, wheezing in pain while she shouted that I should have been the one to die in the river, not her baby. And that was when I finally asked her why she did it, why she hoarded food, why she acted like our lives were hers to waste, and she didn't even hesitate. "Because I was forced to come to this trash village," she growled. "Because your parents were nothing and your people were disgusting, and if I had to suffer here, then someone had to pay for it." That was when I knew there was no saving her. I stood, walked to the window, and noticed a shadow flinch, as if someone had been eavesdropping the entire time, and I didn't say a word, I just left. That night, Claire's house went up in flames. They said she knocked over an oil lamp trying to feed a pillow she thought was her child, screaming its name as the fire consumed her. No one tried to save her. When I asked why, the villagers looked away. They all knew the truth. Someone helped it happen. Maybe the same shadow I saw. Maybe someone else she crossed. But either way, it wasn't my hand that lit the match. I packed my things the next morning, and for the first time in my life, I walked out of that village not as a victim, not as a warning, but as a survivor with 20 acres of justice behind me and a college entrance exam in the capital ahead. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I didn't even plan to go see them. Not really. But something in me needed to see it with my own eyes, so I made one last stop before heading to the capital, walking into the cold stone walls of the provincial prison and asking for Jacob Carter's father, only to be told he was already dead, starved in a corner like the very people he once abandoned. And the guard told me with a disgusted shake of the head that the old man had stirred up gangs inside the prison, tried to play politics, like he did in the village, and when the other inmates realized he was just another fraud with a limp mouth and no power, they dumped him into a pit of waste and left him there until his bones gave out and his pride rotted with him, and I wasn't surprised it died the way he lived, using people, failing them, and then pretending he was the victim. Then came Jacob, limping down the corridor like a broken dog with his head held high like he still owned something, like Claire wasn't ashes and his father wasn't fertilizer, and the moment he saw me, his face twisted into that same vicious grin I'd seen every time he raised his hand to strike me, and he hissed through the bars, "Emily Brooks, I swear on what's left of my life, when I get out, you're the first one I'll kill." And I didn't even blink. I just tilted my head and asked if he wanted to know what happened to Claire. His expression cracked then, just for a second, and I saw a flicker of fear he thought he'd buried. "She's dead," I said flatly. "Burned alive. She tried to feed fire to a pillow. Thought it was your baby. No one's saved her." He stared at me like I'd sucked the air out of the prison itself, his hands gripping the bars, so hard blood pooled at his knuckles, and he howled, not with grief, but with rage, with the agony of a man who realized the dream he'd clung to with fantasy of returning to the city, of being rescued, of playing house with his perfect little liar was gone forever. "You," he whispered. "You did this. You ruined everything I dreamed we made it out, that we had it all." And I leaned in close, my voice low and cruel and honest as sin. "That wasn't a dream. Jacob, that was our past life, and you ruined it all on your own." He screamed again, slammed the bars until his wrists bled, and I walked away without looking back. His mother was next, dragged into the visitation room with eyes like burnt paper, her spine bent from years of bitterness that finally caught up to her, and the second she saw me, she spat through cracked lips, "You cursed thing, you brought down my whole family." I nodded. I did. And I'm proud of it. I told her the truth that her son would never leave prison, that her husband died filthy and forgotten, that her golden daughter-in-law miscarried, went mad, and died in a fire started by either madness or revenge, and her family name meant nothing now, not even on a gravestone. "You'll rot here," I said softly, "and when you finally crawl out of this place in 30 years, you'll have no thing, no land, no bloodline, no name worth remembering." Her hands trembled as she slammed them against the glass and screamed, "You'll die alone, you viper." But I just smiled. At least I get to live first. I left her howling after me, her curses bouncing off the concrete like sad echoes of a past she could never undo, and as I stepped outside, the wind hit my face and carried with it the smell of early spring, of something growing after the ruin, and in the distance, I saw the red banner hanging across the entrance to the college exam center, the words bold and bright against the sky, "Your future starts now," and I ran toward it without looking back, not because I was trying to escape what came before, but because I'd already buried it, every bruise, every scream, every name they called me, and now I had only one name left to carry forward: survivor.